Hello again. I hope you're doing well wherever you find yourself. We're going to talk a little bit about political parties today, more specifically than political parties, political beliefs, really. Um, Political beliefs and uh, kind of why we believe the way we do. And so, um, with, with that being said, it's kind of going to be a conversation that takes us through not only why we believe the way we believe, politically speaking, but also once we kind of come out on the end there are uh, different places that you fall on the spectrum, and so we'll talk about those as well. And there's an assignment that we'll do at the end that sort of highlights that a little bit more even. So political behavior is the beliefs, combination of beliefs and actions that sort of represent who you are. Your ideologies, your beliefs, your belief systems, your culture, that's all micropolitics. That's all kind of the smallest unit we can look at. As political scientists, we're going to think about um, all four of those things on your screen: ideologies, belief systems, culture. That all kind of gets baked into how we think about um, how we think about political behavior. Those things guide our thought process about political behavior, and those things are influenced by your environment, where you're being raised, what zip code you live in, what neighborhood you live in, where you go to school. They're agents of political socialization, parents, friends, uh, activities that you involve yourself in, and your own personality and human nature. Like people have this conversation a lot: nature versus nurture, and just genetically what you're predisposed to, what your personality like situation is, or what kind of personality do you tend to be. Um, Personal characteristics: what kind of things do you enjoy doing? Where do you find yourself associating with, and whom do you associate with? So these are things that all impact and influence our political behaviors and beliefs. And it's important that we take into account these ideas and these concepts when talking about politics, because obviously these things apply differently to different people and in different settings mean different things. And so the more sensitive we can be to the diversity of this and how this is seen and felt and experienced by people around the world, then the better off we're going to be. So just to kind of take the environment a little more in depth, we're just sort of thinking about um, everything that is outside of the individual. So I have taught at Central High School for 18 years, and in those 18 years, the environment at Central has changed numerous times because different people I've worked with have come and gone, and there's been like uh, different administrators, and I've taught different classes. The environment around here has changed. Central is still Central. I mean, it's still a big building on Park Street and in Little Rock, but the environment here changes because environment is external, and any of those things can change it. We get a new Secretary of Education, the environment's going to change, right? The public policies that Secretary of Education will put into place will yet again alter the environment of education. Um, Social and cultural systems also have to be taken into account in the environment. Social and cultural systems in a diverse, pluralistic society like the United States obviously have all kinds of implications about how we think about structures and institutions. Economics, obviously, where you fall on the economic scale impacts the larger environment you're operating in and your view of that environment. So it affects how we are informed about politics. It also affects how we are involved. So it affects informing and involvement. Now, our environment can really dictate how we engage in the, or if we engage in the political process. When we think about our kind of political behavior, you can sort of see um, things that are external to us and things that are internal to us. Beliefs, personality, human nature. That's internal. That's those that you're born with those things. That's kind of who you are, and then kind of your personal characteristics are a close bubble around that. But then your actions and the agents of socialization and your environment are all things that surround you and are outside of you, impacting those things that you already have embedded in your mind. And so this is a great drawing of how those various things that I've been naming are impacting us. So, what are some agents of political socialization? Well, political socialization is the process through which individuals acquire their orientation toward the political world. It's really important as we talk about politics to understand the role that families, schools, peer groups, media, and culture and events play in that socialization. Um, you know, my child is a Democrat. Why is my child a Democrat? Because I'm a Democrat. Why am I a Democrat? Because my parents were Democrats. Why were they Democrats? Because their parents were Democrats, right? They hung out with other Democrats. Uh, you know, whatever the story is. I mean, that's the story, right? Um, my kids' friends are Democrats. My kids' friends are Republicans. Whatever. Like my kid associates with this. My kid associates with that. However that works, those are reinforcing what's already being constructed, and this goes back 100% to the video I asked you to watch earlier in the week about echo chambers and opinion and fact. Uh, the conversations that we've had about that are are now taking this next iteration, its next step down the road here when we're talking about political socialization. We're talking about how those um, things that impact our lives shape us. If you watch MSNBC, the agenda setting that they put forth is going to be very different than the agenda setting that Fox News puts forth. If you watch PBS and listen to NPR, that's going to be very different still than if you just read the Democrat Gazette newspaper. So your agenda, politically speaking, your agenda is going to be defined by these different agents of socialization. Um, so then there are personal characteristics, and these things really do um, kind of. I mean, you're born when you're born. Your gender, your ethnicity, your sex, your education, your income, your social class, your occupation. Some of these things can be fluid, right? Your age can't be fluid, but some of this other stuff can be fluid. But this they're still going to define in a certain way politically how political scientists can uh, often say, well, if you are X, Y, and Z, then you are probably this. So, in other words, there's polling out there that says if you have a post college degree, so you've got a master's degree, you're 72% of people with college degrees or post college degrees, 72% of people who have a college degree and then something else are going to be in favor of Joe Biden, right? And I think the number was similar for Hillary Clinton. What that's telling you is that people who have master's degrees or beyond, 3/4 of them support the Democratic candidate. So when you look at that, like education, right? If you have less than a high school education, um, like 63% of people who don't have a high school education support Donald Trump. So political scientists can make determinations, and they're not 100% accurate, and they don't make it's not a one-to-one great thing, but it does help us paint a broad picture of what's going on politically. That then leads into echo chambers. Sorry for the font difference, but echo chambers. The Again, this has really hurt society, but helped political scientists. Right? It hurts society because it, again, as we've talked about with this all week, echo chambers help people blur the line between opinion and fact, and that's dangerous. But it also does help political scientists see groups better. Sociologists begin to sort of see and understand grouping better, and that becomes something that's useful. So, political personality is sort of um, this is sort of the deeper psychological dynamics inside the individual that affect their response to political stimuli. So you're going to have a response to some sort of political. If I threw out the Second Amendment should be abolished. Some of you are going to go a little crazy. Some of you are going to be like, no way, no, no, no. The Second Amendment is great. I have a right to my gun. Or if I said abortion should be legal, free, and legal for everybody. Some of you are going to be like, what? No, no. And you will have a response immediately to that political stimuli. You will have an immediate reaction. And um, those political stimuli, when coupled with your personality traits, we can generally cluster people into certain types. We can generally say people fall, and again, it's not exact science, but it's holds generally true. And so, you know, the idea um, that we can sort of begin to create clusters and types is helpful, right? It's helpful because it allows us to know what, if that stimuli, if you get upset about the Second Amendment and your right to own a gun, and you're afraid I'm going to take that away, well, then that would help inform political parties of what kind of candidate they should run in that district. What kind of candidate should they put forth? So, normative approaches, or what type of personality makes a good leader? Well, taking into account the conditions of any said district, any sort of all of these kinds of personality traits. Do they have a high level of education in this district? Do they have a high level of economic success in this district? These are would be things that we'd want to take into account to see what would make a good leader in that district. Um, so, you know, when we think about political science, when we think about political personality, we're thinking about how uh, we we not only would vote for a candidate, but who those candidates are, who those people are going to be in that given in that given district or area. The the personal characteristics, the environment, serve as a piece of the puzzle. So yes, they are important, but they're not going to cover all of it. And so we're going to look into some of the other pieces of that. But I would argue that the environment and personal characteristics, though they may be inadequate as in terms of being uh, giving us a complete explanation of individual political behavior, they give us a good indication of, right. There is a good amount of knowledge we can gain from a person's educational status, economic status, uh, gender status, ethnicity. It doesn't give us the full painting, but it gives us a good outline. So there's something called normative political theory that sort of asks us to ask the should questions. Um, sort of basic issues of why we need government. How do people associate with each other? How should governments function? How should people in government interact? These kind of basic approaches, questions that we should be asking um, at kind of a baseline level. In a civics class, a ninth grade civics class, these are the kinds of questions we should be asking. Why do we need government? How do people associate with each other? How should the government function? How should people in the government interact? That's just like a ninth grade civics. Those are the questions that we need to be thinking about. And Thomas Hobbes, who I've mentioned a little bit in the ethics lecture I did a couple of days ago, he has this understanding of the social contract, and I made reference to it in that lecture as well, that the ruler, the king, is empowered by the social contract and is not limited by it. He gets to dictate the terms of that contract. People cede their authority to the ruler. People need a strong hand, and a strong-handed ruler comes in and governs the people. The people are completely given over to the leader. They completely cede their rights to the leader, and that's Thomas Hobbes' view of the social contract. And there's, again, when we're talking about why we need government and how we interact, this is a version of answering those questions. Those basic questions I just went over, this is a version of answering those questions. It is not a version that we practice much today, though there are some countries where this is practiced. This is not a version that is something many Americans are keen on. We don't want to cede authority to anybody. We're proud to be independent. But as we're talking about theory and as we're talking about different types of thoughts out there, this is a type of thought. So some other thoughts that exist that we will spend more time on than Hobbes are classic liberalism, conservatism, populism, and libertarianism. And we're going to talk about each of those four in more depth. You're going, in your assignment today, you're going to take a political survey, which we will go over the political survey a little bit and kind of walk through it. And you will they have a graph, and you will be plotted on that graph. And basically the quadrants of the graph are going to be these four things. And so your little red dot will be put somewhere on this graph, and you will be a liberal, conservative, populist, libertarian. So one of the kind of key issues that we talk about in political ideology is this individual human nature. Just the relationship between individual and society, and the desirability of establishing certain kinds of equality among individuals. When we look at those baseline questions that I mentioned a few slides ago, when we look at those baseline questions, we have to take into account individual human nature. That's why I spent the first few slides of this lecture talking about human nature, personal characteristics, agents of socialization. All of those things play into how then the individual and society work together. And then what's the best way to establish equality among individuals? Because I think we will admit that as you look at the social pyramid and you think about all of those different things that we've mentioned in this lecture, there's not equality among individuals. And so trying to study those differences so that we can build bridges between the different groups. Classical liberalism is the first theory that is posited to help us figure out how to build some of those bridges. Um, Classical liberalism places the highest value on individual freedom and posits the role of government should be quite limited. Emerged as a response to rigid hierarchical societies. We in classic liberalism are looking at Thomas Jefferson, right? Um, don't like a king, think the king's too strong. People deserve to have individual freedom. People deserve to have their freedoms protected by the government, and that's basically what the government should do. Each person should live responsibly, but also should be allowed to live in a manner dictated by her beliefs and enjoy the benefits of efforts with minimal limitations from institutions. So I should be able to live my life, and the institutions should only be created to help my life exist. They shouldn't intrude on my life. And that's kind of a very simple way to think about classical liberalism. Um, John Locke was a person who favored classic liberalism, um, but it's the individuals trying to reach their full capacity, um, while the government, the hierarchy, is not as dominant. Laissez-faire economics, um, very hands-off economics. Um, there is legal equality, obviously, in liberalism. So something like the civil rights movement, that's institutions doing good work. That's the institution doing what it should do, ensuring that. Um, but the government should not try to create material equality. In other words, the government shouldn't do a uh, universal income, right? Universal basic income, which is the idea that the government should give every American $20,000 or whatever. That's no, 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 no. But the government should ensure that members of the LGBTQ community can marry freely and be with their spouses in the hospital. That African Americans can go to any school they want to go to, et cetera, et cetera. That's legal, and that's acceptable under liberalism, but they shouldn't be about the business of redistributing wealth. So that's generally liberalism. Conservatism, and we're going to talk about liberalism and conservatism a little bit more in another PowerPoint. Conservatism is about stability, tradition, loyalty to God, loyalty to country. Um, the stability, though, is the key. Um, they want to prevent or slow the transition away from a society based on traditional values and social hierarchy. And here is the rub. When we're talking about traditional values and social hierarchy and conservatism, whose traditions are we talking about? Right? And that is, um, sort of the key. It's like, yeah, we want traditional values, but whose traditional values? And the ideas of stability and tradition. You can see loyalty to God, loyalty to country. These are all about who are we talking about? Stable for whom, right? Whose God are we talking about? So that's conservatism. It's it is, again, when you think about the individual and society. Um, Here we're thinking about institutions enforcing those codes, those ideas that fall within conservatism, those ideas that fall within that. And so um, traditional values and ethics provide the guidelines for group cooperation and individual behavior. The idea that the person who gets to define traditional values and ethics, they provide the guideline for everybody, right? Um, that's it. And equality cannot be forced. You can't force equality. And so conservatism like I said, we will talk more in depth about conservatism and liberalism in a coming PowerPoint. Populism, we won't spend a whole lot of time on, except to say that really it emphasizes people, and that by people we're talking about common people. And you can be a conservative populist, and you can be a liberal populist. Uh, Donald Trump, conservative populist; Bernie Sanders, liberal populist, because it emphasizes. They both emphasize the common person. Um, it is always seen as over and against the elites. So if we talk about populism being for the people, then we've got to talk about it being for the people, which means it's against the elites. Libertarianism is another core principle, which just basically has a skepticism of authority and state power, maximum political freedom and autonomy. One of the things that I think you would find like a libertarian would be totally opposed to the government talking about making drugs illegal. If you want to use drugs, use drugs. The government's way overbounds when it comes up with legalizing or making drugs illegal. So the government, the institutions are completely minimized, and the political freedom of an individual is maximized. So that's libertarianism. So reactions to policy questions usually are just described in terms of three other factors. So like if I brought up a policy and you're going to, in the assignment today, you're going to read a bunch of different little one sentence policy statements. And your factual knowledge about the political world, your feelings, kind of your environment, your socialization, those things, and your powers of assessment, your education, your thought, how often you think about things like this, all of those things are going to play into how you respond to the statements you're going to read in a few minutes in this assignment. And when you do those things, when you read these statements, you be aware of the fact that these beliefs are being channeled into your interpretation of that statement. And that's not good, it's not bad, but it is something to be aware of. As you are evaluating and thinking about statements you're going to do today, make sure that you try to synthesize the facts that you know about this, and these are the real facts that you know about what you're reading, and then your feelings about that topic. So if you're doing evaluative orientations or effective orientations, even as you're doing those, if you're thinking about a statement on abortion, okay, what are the facts about abortion and what are your feelings about abortion, right? And make the evaluation thinking about not only the facts and your feelings, but like I've said in some previous slides, the group dynamic of that as well, right? What is the group dynamic of that? What is the consequence, to go back to the ethics slide, to the ethics lecture? What is a consequence of you making this, right? Making these evaluations and these thoughts. And so, a simple cognitive orientation would just be looking at the political facts and removing feeling from it altogether, right? Because maybe abortion is not a thing that you think one way or the other about. You don't have feelings about abortions one way or the other. You just can make a political assessment of that. You can make a cognitive orientation of that, right? I don't have any feelings one way or the other about abortions, so my cognitive orientation will be just the political facts about this. We will look into public opinion polls a little more deeper later in the 9 weeks, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that slide. Some of the things that will be helpful when we're looking at individuals' political orientations. And this now we're talking about um, not necessarily average people, but we're talking, though that may be the case sometimes. Generally, we're talking about politicians here. I want to think us think that we will talk more about it from a political leader or elected leader. You know, what what are ways we can think about and judge and contemplate our political leaders, um, and it kind of examine their belief system. So first, you would have to take the content of their beliefs. What's the record? What does the record say this person believes in? And then, what's the complexity of their beliefs? Is it pretty simple and simplistic? Because again, not good or bad, but that says something. The person's beliefs are very shallow, and there's not a lot of complexity to that. Not judging, but it does say something about the thought they've put into their belief system. Are they consistent? If I say that I am pro life, but then I am in favor of the death penalty, am I really pro life? If I say I am pro life, but I am wanting to throw homeless people in jail, am I really for life? So, consistency of ideas, consistency of how we think, um, and then sort of the stability of that, stability and motivation. The motivation being, why does the person have the belief? Is the person only espousing a belief to get elected? Or is that really, can you really tell, and do you really think a person is espousing that belief because they are motivated by that belief and they are truly want to do right by that? So these are things that, as we look at political leaders, as we look at elected leaders, um, questions, thoughts that should come to our mind. Um, Now, kind of again, this would be belief systems among mass publics. Um, Generally speaking, and that this is why on this slide here we're talking maybe more about, I would say, more about elected officials, and here we're talking more about the general public. Um, Generally, because unfortunately, the general public doesn't have the greatest grasp of political issues. They generally uh, can be very volatile. They can be inconsistent across their beliefs, and generally they struggle with some abstract political concepts, as I imagine many of you are doing now. Um, the idea is that the mass public does struggle with political issues. They struggle thinking about political issues, which is why I've tried to talk about ethics. I've tried to talk about, um, belief systems and echo chambers and things like that, so that we can build into really thinking more critically about policy issues, political issues. There are political elites, and political elites are obviously the people who do think about politics and who do think about policy and have high levels of interest and influence and involvement in political life. Um, they are elite because, just like any other area of life, they have gotten an interest in this, and because they become elite, just like a heart surgeon or a neurosurgeon or whatever, a highly trained doctor, or if you want to go to doctors, we can talk about highly trained lawyers or highly trained athletes. In every area, there are elites, right? An NBA player is an elite basketball player. They wouldn't be in the NBA if they weren't. There are political elites. There are people who um, think about and have influence in and interest in politics, and they drive it just like the NBA drives basketball. Political elites drive politics. The problem is I may like basketball. I do. I like the NBA. It's great. I'm never going to play in the NBA. And as such, I can watch it and I can it doesn't really have a whole lot of impact on my life. My team is not in it. I don't watch it as much. It's no big deal. But in politics, the political elite can drive the conversation. And because of the social contract, because of the fact that politics is all of us, we get we get drugged behind, which is why it's important. You don't have to be a political elite. You don't have to be at the NBA level of politics, but you need to at least understand how it works so that you don't get drugged behind as much. So that's why it's so important to think about politics that way. Um, so I'm going to exit from the PowerPoint here and go into Schoolology for a second. You are going to take the political compass test, which is linked in the assignment, and you're going to answer these questions here. It's not linked in the assignment. I'm sorry, it's linked in the folder. You're going to tell me where you fall in the test. Were you surprised by where you fell? And then you're going to tell me which questions or statements interested you the most, the least, and why. And then you're going to ask a friend, parents, sibling, where they think they might fall and discuss why you are similar or different. So this is the link to the test, okay? And you can see it here. It's just it's page 1 of 6, and they're going to give you a statement here, and you're going to click on strongly disagree, agree, or strongly agree. I generally say this: if you really are passionate, I've talked about this in this PowerPoint, I've talked about it in others. If it is a topic that you feel passionate about, that you remember when I had this slide with cognitive. The slide with cognitive and oh my goodness, you will understand that is, if it's just a cognitive political belief without any passion behind it, then I would put agree or disagree. If it is something you have passion behind, for instance, I'd always support my country whether it was right or wrong. That's not a thing that I think much about. So I would say disagree, agree, whatever. But if it's something that that just when you read it, your heart kind of went up a beat, then you would strongly disagree or strongly agree. So the strongly is there for a reason. This is my point. And you click on it when there is something that really gets you impassioned. Okay. And so that's, you'll go through all of this, and I'm not going to do it now. It will end you on a page that will plot your place, and it will put you as a liberal or an authoritarian or a conservative, or it'll put you somewhere, and it will explain your ranking. It'll explain where you go, why you're listed where you are listed. And then you can come back and answer those questions in Schoolology, and there'll be a submit assignment button for you to put that there. So as you kind of do that, I want you to sort of think about those things and do that assignment. If you've got questions, this was a really long lecture, a lot of information on it. So if you have questions, you need me to refresh your memory about something or clarify something, please email me and let me know what you need clarification on. Otherwise, and also if you're taking this test and some of these policy statements you don't get, again, email them to me, let me know, and I will do my best to try to explain them to you so that you can get a clearer sense of what they are. I don't want you to just answer a question if you don't really understand it on this political survey. I'd like for you to try to understand what you're agreeing or disagreeing to. So again, email me if you have questions. Otherwise, I will talk to you later. Hope you have a good one.